It tells the Confederate story, but not the way that it's being told these days. I have asked more than 5,000 people, mostly teachers, around the U.S. for about the last 6 or 7 years, why did the South secede? I always get 4 answers. I get they seceded for slavery, for states' rights, because of the election of Lincoln, or tariffs and taxes, or arguments about the same. And then I ask these teachers to vote. And overwhelmingly, whether I am asking in North Carolina, where I did it first, or in northern Minnesota, where I happen to do it second, or in North Dakota, where I've done it, or overall overwhelmingly black audience in Memphis, or Central Florida, or Cleveland, or Southern California, always states' rights wins a clear majority, about 60 to 70% of my huge audiences of teachers say states' rights. Now, what's the matter with that? Well, it's completely false is what's the matter with it. As the southern states leave the Union, and that's why this is called a reader, because it includes what they say as they leave the Union, South Carolina first, and then each one says, we are upset with states' rights. We are seceding because we are mad at some states and the rights they're trying to manifest. For instance,
Pennsylvania. Free states, you mean?
Free states. Pennsylvania, for instance, is messing around with the Fugitive Slave Act a little bit. They say, we know it's a national act, we can't do anything about it. But we can, and then they proceed to do little things, like they pass a law saying, we know that our gendarmes, our state police, our deputy sheriffs and so on, that they have the job of tracking down any escaped slave and stuff. You do what you have to under this bill, but we're not paying you for that time. All right, this totally upsets South Carolina. South Carolina is upset by New York because New York no longer allows what's called slavery transit or temporary slavery. It used to be, for instance, the nice white folks from Charleston didn't want to spend August in Charleston. I understand that, having done it recently. So they'd rather go to New York City and see some plays. But they'd like to bring their cook along. And New York now says, if you bring your enslaved cook into New York, we're trying to run a free state. She becomes free. South Carolina is outraged about this. It's one of the reasons she secedes.
Well, that was the basis of the Dred Scott decision. That Dred Scott went up to Minnesota with his master, and when he came back down south, he said, hey, wait a minute, I was in a free state, I'm free now.
Yeah, and so the issue well, that was trickier because Minnesota, I think, was a territory then.
Yes.
There's no question that New York does have the right to do this within. They're even mad at New Hampshire because New Hampshire lets blacks vote. Now, who the heck votes in America is the state's right at this point. It's not until the 15th Amendment that you mentioned earlier, passed 2 whole eras later during Reconstruction, that it becomes a national matter. So what business is it of South Carolina's? Well, they make it their business using the Dred Scott as an example. They say, look, we've got this law, this decision that says black folks have no rights a white person needs to respect, and here you New Hampshireans are letting them vote. This is an outrage. We've had enough. We're seceding. So they're seceding against states' rights and totally about slavery.
Yeah.
And yet, most teachers teach it exactly backward, which really shows the power of neo-Confederates. That's why the book is called The Confederate and Neo-Confederate Reader. Right now, in 2012.
The reinvention. It's interesting. I grew up in Michigan, and I learned as a child in school that the South seceded in large part to protect slavery, but also to protect an agrarian way of life, you know, cotton and whatnot, and the North was industrializing. My children grew up in Atlanta, and in the public schools, they learned that the South seceded because the Northern bankers were ripping off the Southern plantation owners.
Some more BS.
Yeah, I know. It's really quite remarkable. Sundown towns. One of your books is about sundown towns. We have about 3 minutes here. I'd like to get into.
Let's tell them what a sundown town is. Okay.
Yes, please.
A sundown town is a town that's all white on purpose. All right. They get their name. I need to say that a lot of towns are all white on purpose in, for instance, Pennsylvania or in Maryland, but the term isn't used much east of Ohio. But nevertheless, they're sundown towns. The name comes from places like, for instance, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, which up until the late 1960s, or maybe even 1970, had a sign at its city limits saying, "Nigger, don't let the sun go down on you," in Manitowoc. Same sign in Hawthorne, California. Same sign in Pekin, Illinois. And you don't have to have a sign, as I mentioned. When I went to write this book, I grew up in the middle of Illinois, as I mentioned earlier.
Black history shouldn't be regulated to 28 to 29 days in February, but should be covered and celebrated every day. We've created our second digital PDF Beyond February, a follow-up to our first digital PDF Black History Facts you probably didn't learn in school. Both PDFs are full of Black history facts and stories that aren't usually taught in school. Both digital PDFs can be downloaded and read at your convenience. You don't want to miss out on the chance to uncover the untold Black history facts and stories. Click the link in our bio to support BHU.